When any film is created, everything starts with the story. It's the core foundation that the entire narrative is built on. The Mummy 2017 was no exception. However, in this case, the task was far more complicated. From the very beginning, the film wasn't meant to be just a standalone story, but a stepping stone toward a much larger franchise, the so-called Dark Universe. Because of that, the creators had to work in two directions at once. They needed to tell the story of the Mummy itself, while at the same time laying the groundwork for future films. As a result, the story carefully weaves in hints about other iconic characters who were meant to appear later: Dracula, Frankenstein, and the creature from the Black Lagoon. The Mummy ends up serving two roles at once: a complete standalone film, and at the same time, a kind of prologue to the entire future universe. Because of this, some important details went unnoticed by the audience, and others were simply ignored by the filmmakers altogether. For example, we were never shown how Dr. Jekyll managed to decipher the ancient Egyptian puzzle. And this was far more than just an artifact. At its core, it was a multi-layered system, a map, a record of coins, and most importantly, a kind of mechanism for tracking time. In the film's script, it's revealed that the Doctor spent a long time deciphering the message and eventually discovered that the curse cannot be stopped, that the deal with the god of the desert is inevitable, and that his power will pass to the Chosen One. There's no point in destroying the dagger or the stone, and no real way to contain Amanet. In the end, the Doctor will stand alone, and Set will gain a physical form. But this crucial part of the storyline never made it into the final cut, which is why audiences didn't fully understand what the dagger really is. Why did the ancient Egyptians perform such a complex ritual? They mummified Ahmanet, hid her sarcophagus, and built an elaborate system designed to keep the mummy locked inside its prison. It would have been much simpler to just burn the princess and destroy the dark artifact. A lot was cut from the film, which is why the story feels partially unfinished and incomplete. I think it's time to fix that. My name is Evgeny, and today we're doing a deep dive into The Mummy 2017. It's time to find out how the serial killer Jack the Ripper managed to overcome his madness, and how he ended up leading the organization known as Prodigium. I promise this is going to be interesting. Let's begin. So, at the very beginning of the film, we're shown how a group of workers, while digging a tunnel beneath London, discovers a burial site of the Knights Templar. A secret organization, Prodigium, immediately arrives at the site, specializing in the study of mystical ancient artifacts. The organization is led by Dr. Henry Jekyll. We'll definitely come back to his story later, but for now, what matters is the message, something the film barely gives enough attention to. In the script, this scene is much longer and far more detailed. This artifact is actually one of the key elements of the entire story, because within this ancient message, there's a hidden map, a history, and even a calendar. If you look closely, you can spot the Red Sea, the island of Cyprus, the sacred city of Jerusalem, St. Catherine's Monastery, the fortress of Damietta, and many other locations and territories that were important to the Crusaders at the time. They were the ones who created the map before placing a stone disc with a message over it, and the disc itself was found by the knights at the entrance to Amanet's tomb. It serves not only as a warning, but also as a kind of timer. Around this time mechanism, the Templars installed a bronze ring, which tells the story of the princess and outlines the terms of the pact. The film actually does a great job showing Amanet's backstory, but the conditions of the deal were left out. And yet, all the key information is hidden in those inscriptions. Without it, it's hard to fully understand the events of the film. And now you'll see why. The message inscribed on the bronze ring reads like this: "The coming of Set cannot be stopped. The one who makes a pact with him is cursed. Death holds no power over that person until the terms of the deal are fulfilled. In the end, evil will gain a physical form. When the dagger and the heart pierce the flesh, the god of the desert will be set free." In other words, there's no way to break this cycle. The moment you summon the god and sell your soul to him, there's only one possible outcome. After making the deal, Amanet will eventually find her chosen one, and the ritual will be completed. That's exactly why the priests didn't burn the princess. There was no point. She would have risen from the ashes anyway or been reborn in another body. Death itself cannot truly claim her, at least not until the dagger pierces the flesh. No matter what you do, the outcome is always the same. For the same reason, neither the Egyptians nor the Crusaders destroyed the artifacts, the stone and the dagger. All the priests could do was delay the inevitable, buy themselves time. Ahmanet couldn't be killed. There was only one option left: to keep the curse contained. That's why the princess was mummified. Protective hieroglyphs were carved along the entire inner surface of the sarcophagus, designed to prevent the mummy from escaping, and at the same time serve as a warning. They also told the story of the cursed princess. Around the perimeter, you can notice two snakes coiling around the sarcophagus. This isn't just decoration, it's a direct symbol of sealing and control. In Egyptian symbolism, snakes act as guardians. They don't just restrain, they preserve the balance between life and death. Even the chains that held the entire mechanism together were made in a similar style. We can see the symbol of the Ouroboros, a snake devouring its own tail. In ancient Egypt, this wasn't just a symbol of infinity. The Ouroboros represented the boundary between chaos and order, and from that we can understand something important. The Egyptians weren't trying to defeat the curse. They knew that was impossible. All they could do was isolate Amanet, seal her away, perform the ritual, and turn the sarcophagus into a kind of temporary prison, which was meant to hold back the inevitable for as long as possible. Another decision was made as well: to use Mercury as a protective barrier. Mercury was believed to isolate Ahmanet's influence. The film even directly states that the priests believed Mercury could weaken evil spirits.
The ancient Egyptians believed it weakened evil spirits.
In reality, that isn't true. The ancient Egyptians didn't use this metal in their rituals. There's no historical evidence for it. In actual ancient Egyptian beliefs, Mercury was not considered a way to fight evil spirits. The filmmakers borrowed this idea from Chinese mythology instead, specifically from the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. And it's not just about the terracotta army. According to historical accounts, entire rivers of mercury flowed inside the mausoleum, creating not only a symbolic but also a deadly barrier. In The Mummy, a similar idea is used. The sarcophagus is completely submerged in a pool of mercury, which helps contain the evil and Amanet's influence within. But mercury is a highly unstable and dangerous substance. It begins to evaporate at temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius, which means that even in a sealed space, its vapors would gradually spread, rising upward rather than filling the entire chamber. As the vapors cool, they settle back down, and in the film's logic, there's a system of channels designed to collect the condensed metal and return it back into the pool. But there's no such thing as a perpetual system. Over time, this cycle would lose its efficiency. Some of the mercury would settle on the walls, some would be lost in tiny cracks, and the concentration of vapor would gradually decrease. Even with a sealed and carefully designed structure, this mechanism had its flaw and its own timer. After a few thousand years, the mercury would have completely disappeared, and Amanet would have been able to break free. But the Egyptians didn't know that, and they believed they had accounted for everything. After performing the secret ritual, the priests of ancient Egypt placed a stone disc over the entrance to the cave. This disc marked the moment when the day of evil's release would come. Deciphering the message is extremely difficult, and the script never gives a direct explanation of how Dr. Jekyll managed to do it. But if you look closely, you can see that at the very center, there's a sun setting below the horizon. This is definitely not a sunrise. The Egyptians didn't always depict the sun as a full disk, but before its transition into the realm of the dead, Ra, Aten, Khepri, all benevolent and divine symbols, were always shown with a complete sun. But here, the disk is only shown halfway, the moment when the sun sinks below the horizon. In ancient Egypt, this was associated with the arrival of chaos, which means the presence of the god Set. Around it, we see a wavy line, which most often represents water, but in this case, the line is closed, forming a boundary. In other words, at the center of the stone artifact, it shows that the power of the god Set is sealed within a barrier. Around the outer ring, we can see 8 more circles. At the top and along the sides, there are symbols of the sun and light, 3 in total. On the left, we see the god of chaos and destruction, Set. To the right of him, there's a girl kneeling. That's Ahmanet. In the upper corners, on the right side, there's the Ankh, the symbol of eternal life. On the left, the Wadjet, the Eye of Horus, one of the most important symbols of protection against evil. And at the very bottom, there's the Amenta, a symbol of the gateway to the underworld, the realm of the dead. Almost all of these elements in ancient Egypt were associated with specific constellations and linked to the sky, with the exception of Ahmanet herself. Further along the outer ring, we can see figures of people who appear to be holding up the heavens with their hands, and this strongly resembles the Dendera zodiac. It's actually quite common for production designers to use real historical artifacts when creating a film. It helps give the scenes a sense of authenticity. But why are there 8 circles? In Egyptian numerology, this number represents the Ogdoad, the 8 primordial gods of chaos, who existed before the creation of the world. For the priests, the number 8 was seen as a sacred barrier. They believed that these 8 original gods of chaos guarded the boundaries of the universe. By placing 8 smaller discs around the setting sun, the Egyptians essentially created a kind of protective shield. But within this same disc, a date is also encoded, the exact moment when Mercury would no longer be able to contain Amanet's power. In other words, the priests calculated the precise point in time when the metal would simply evaporate. At the same time, the film never really shows how this was supposed to work in practice, and even the script doesn't provide a clear answer. Only one thing is clear: when everything is aligned correctly with the stars, recreating this exact pattern, that moment will come when the power of the god set is finally released. Unfortunately, the film never tells us whether the Templars managed to fully decipher it, and we're not even shown how they found the dark artifacts in the first place. But most of the answers can actually be found in the script. I'm honestly surprised at how much the filmmakers chose to simplify the story. According to the script, during the 5th Crusade, arguably the most Egypt-focused campaign of the Middle Ages, the strategy shifted. In the earlier Crusades, the main goal was Jerusalem, but this time they believed that to reclaim the Holy Land, they first had to strike Egypt, the very heart of Muslim power. They didn't manage to conquer the entire country, but the knights were able to capture the fortress of Damietta, where they eventually discovered the ancient artifacts, the dagger, the stone, and a stele that told the full story of Princess Amanet. After studying the findings, the knights realized what kind of dark force they were dealing with. The Templars couldn't ignore the curse, so they set out to find the princess's tomb. When they arrived, they found only the ruins of a fortress. Over the centuries, the entrance to the cave had been buried in sand, so they had to excavate a large area before finally uncovering the Egyptian warning at the entrance to the tomb. The Templars never entered the tomb itself. Most likely, they understood that they had no way of containing the evil buried inside. But they found another solution. They decided to transport all the discovered artifacts to London and hide them securely there. At the same time, the key elements were deliberately separated. The dagger was hidden in the Church of All Saints, while the red ruby was placed in the grave of one of the knights, concealed beneath the lower level. Interestingly, in the final version of the film, the clues pointing to the exact locations of the artifacts were removed. For example, the ruby was hidden in the crypt, and on the tombstone of the grave where it was placed, there was a carving of a knight with his right hand resting on his chest, while his left hand held the hilt of a sword. And if you look closely, you can see that all the tombs are different. Some knights have both hands on their chest, others on their stomach, some on their sword, others are shown in prayer, but none match that exact hand position. For some reason, this detail was later ignored by the filmmakers, and when the ruby is discovered, we're shown a completely different grave than the one at the beginning of the film. But there are quite a few inconsistencies like this. The same goes for the map and the coordinates. The lines on the original don't match the ones in Dr. Henry Jekyll's decoded version. But we'll get back to that a bit later. If we take all of this into account, we can look at the film in a completely different way, because now we understand that Jekyll knew from the very beginning that the curse could not be stopped. That's why he wanted to meet Nick personally, to understand what kind of person he really is and whether he is truly cursed. From the start, the Doctor didn't intend to kill Ahmanet. His plan was to carry out a controlled ritual, and only after Set gained a physical form to kill Nick. Do you remember the princess's words and the conversation between Jekyll and Nick?
Cursed, Mr. Morton. This is not some common cold you have. You have been selected.
The Egyptians didn't know how to destroy evil, but Dr. Henry fights it every single day. His alter ego, Hyde, is nothing less than the embodiment of that very evil. And this is where I came up with a really interesting theory about the Doctor. You've probably noticed the large number of medical instruments, and they all look quite old, late 19th century. During his conversation, we heard Jekyll talk about his past. He mentions having a patient, and of course he's referring to himself, a promising young man who later developed a kind of illness, a craving for pleasure, and a desire for the suffering of others. But being a man of medicine, he realized that evil is pathological, which means it can be treated. Jekyll developed his own formula, which ultimately split him into two personalities, a restrained gentleman and the vile, malicious Hyde. When Henry fails to take the serum in time, he loses control for a brief moment, and Hyde is set free. And in that state, he speaks about his desire to possess women.
I am chaos destruction. The ladies will love us.
All of these details led me to a thought. What if Henry is actually Jack the Ripper, the elusive serial killer who terrorized the streets of London in the late 19th century? To this day, the Ripper's identity remains unknown, but his victims were mostly young women. And what's even more disturbing, their bodies were brutally mutilated, cut with precision, and in some cases internal organs were surgically removed and never found at the crime scene, which means the Ripper took them with him. In the Doctor's lab, we see the same obsession, collecting and preserving organs, skulls, and limbs of monsters. On top of that, the organization Prodigium was founded in the late 19th century, and its leader has always been Dr. Jekyll, which means Henry has been around for over a century, even though you wouldn't guess it by his appearance. And Hyde even hints in one of the dialogues that he's been alive for a very long time, even though in reality Tom Cruise is actually older than Russell Crowe.
You are a younger man, but you'd best learn to be wary of a man like me.
If we look at the early concept art by Stevie Young, we can see how Jekyll's office was originally designed. There are some important details. An old newspaper, the Dell Telegraph, and a black and white photograph. This could be a hint that he keeps evidence of his past crimes, reading those terrifying late 19th century headlines about the elusive Jack the Ripper. And that photograph of his family might have given us a clear answer about the Doctor's true age. If you put all these clues together, it's hard to ignore the possibility that he really is Jack the Ripper. Even the similarity in the names, Jack and Jekyll, his obsessive desire for women, his medical knowledge, his experiments, somehow he managed to create a serum that suppresses his urge for violence. But the price was the emergence of a second personality, Hyde, and Jekyll didn't stop there. He went even further and built an entire organization dedicated to finding and studying evil as if it were a disease, something that in his view could be controlled or even cured. At the same time, we have very little information about the organization Prodigium itself. From additional materials, we know that shortly before the discovery of the Templar burial site, Prodigium captured an amphibious humanoid creature in the Amazon rainforest. Its remains are now kept at the organization's headquarters. 2 years before these events, they encountered an unknown vampire. His skull is shown to us directly in the film, and now we can say with confidence, it's not Dracula. As for the rest of the discoveries, they remain unclear, even though the laboratory clearly holds a massive collection. You can spot numerous body parts there, including what appears to be the remains of a giant squid, but whose remains these are is never explained. and there's no information about them in the additional materials either. It's a real shame that this entire storyline never made it into the final cut of the film, because there was clearly a lot of potential to develop it further. Another important detail that was left out of the final cut is the progression of Henry's condition. He even says himself that they're now working in immunology, and that he has to take the serum almost every hour. But it wasn't always like that. The thing is, whenever Jekyll is close to evil, his suppressed side, Edward Hyde, begins to grow stronger. It works like a kind of compass, guiding him towards sources of the supernatural. The script also mentions that when the Doctor came into contact with the Egyptian artifacts, he discovered large amounts of mercury within the stone, and it was his dark side that actually helped him decipher the message. But after that, Henry's condition rapidly worsened. He had to take the serum more often and significantly increase the dosage. And this can be seen as a kind of signal. He really was on the right path. But the closer the Doctor gets to evil, the stronger it becomes inside him. When it comes to the ritual and the organization, things are more or less clear. But with Princess Ahmanet, everything becomes much more complicated for the key characters in the story. Amanet wasn't dead in the usual sense, but she wasn't truly alive either. The ancient Egyptians didn't see things as simply alive or dead. They believed that a person was made up of multiple aspects. Ka, the life force; Ba, the personality, the soul; Akh, the enlightened spirit. By making the pact with Set, Ahmanet lost her soul. She bypassed the natural laws of the afterlife, which means there was no passage into the realm of the dead. Instead, her dark spirit remained bound to the world of the living, and in order to restore her strength and life energy, she is forced to feed on the souls of others. Her body is just a vessel, inside of which the dark essence of Set exists. This is directly hinted at by the symbols and hieroglyphs covering her body. They resemble a mix of ancient Hebrew, runes, Slavic bukvica, and Greek script. These markings were specially created for the film, and each one represents a specific ability of the mummy: strength, endurance, control, influence, and immortality. The more she restores her body and consumes souls, the stronger she becomes. Even at the end of the film, when it seems like Nick drains the last of her life, Amanet doesn't actually die. She can't truly be killed. That's part of the pact. That's why we see Prodigium performing their own ritual, using the same sarcophagus and the same kind of sacrifice. Beyond her immortality, Amanet can also control the dead, creating an army of the undead. However, to take control of a living human body, she needs a host: spiders. It can start with a bite, as we see in the case of Chris Vale, but to speed up the process of control, the spider has to get directly into the victim's head. At that point, the princess is able to control the person's mind, essentially taking over their nervous system and bending all their actions to her will. But Vale is a slightly different case. Not only did he become a puppet, his soul was also cursed. And you can see it in his eyes. In ancient Egypt, the eyes were believed to reflect the soul, and when a soul was cursed, the gaze would become empty, lifeless. But it wasn't the princess who cursed Chris. In reality, he brought this tragedy on himself. Ahmanet's power can control the bodies of the living through the spiders, but not their souls. The answer lies in Vale's actions. He was the only one from the group who entered the tomb and stole the golden ornaments from the priests. By doing that, he narushled the order of Ma'at, and his soul was no longer worthy of the realm of the dead. As a result, Chris is doomed to wander between worlds, following Nick and guiding him straight into the princess's hands. He does this in the hope that in the end, death might show him mercy, and that one day the gates of the afterlife will open for him. As you can see, most of Ahmanet's abilities are essentially borrowed from the original films. Some scenes feel like direct copies, clearly relying on the audience's sense of nostalgia. After all, the films by Stephen Sommers have long become classics. They didn't just perform well at the box office. They stood out because of their cohesive storytelling and strong sense of adventure, something that unfortunately can't really be said about the new version. The Mummy 2017 is hard to define. It's neither a true continuation nor a Polnatseny reboot. Yes, the Book of the Dead appears in Dr. Jekyll's library, a key artifact from the original trilogy, but it feels more like an Easter egg than a real connection. And it's clearly not enough to hold the audience's interest. At the box office, the film made around $400 million, and the problem wasn't really the marketing, the direction, or even the cast. The biggest mistake was trying to please everyone at once. Originally, the project was meant to be much deeper, with a carefully built mythology, complex puzzles, and a strong sense of ancient Egyptian mystery. But in the end, it turned into an overloaded hybrid, a mix of adventure action in the spirit of the weaker moments of Indiana Jones, and a horror concept that was never fully realized. Right at the beginning of the film, we're shown a complex artifact with its own system of coordinates, connected to the fortress of Damietta. But how exactly it was deciphered is never explained at all. The only thing we really hear is the word haram, an Islamic term that doesn't have a direct historical connection to the Crusaders, but was likely used as something more familiar to the audience. In the end, the film relies mostly on visual imagery, crows, split pupils. It all looks impressive, but has only a loose connection to actual Egyptian symbolism, just like the reference to the Second Crusade. The Egyptian campaign didn't begin until the Fifth Crusade, and it feels like almost nothing remained from the original script, with all its ideas and depth, and the dark universe never truly managed to realize its full potential. Personally, I think they should have focused on a clear direction within a single genre, instead of trying to replicate the films of Stephen Sommers. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.